All right, so thank you so much for joining me today. I was going to ask if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Amanda Kelly. I also go as Panda Miniatures on all my social media accounts. So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I primarily do a lot of commercial miniature work. So I work with large companies like I've worked with Coca-Cola, Netflix. I just recently worked with General Mills and Xbox. So I do a lot of commercial miniature sets, miniature props, and also campaign ads, content creation. Mostly a lot of my recent commission work has been content for TikTok. So that's been kind of interesting. And then on the other side of that coin, I also do fine art miniatures. So I'm a graduate student at Radford University. I'm working on my MFA in sculpture. I also teach, so I teach 3D foundations. So I do a lot.
Wow, that's awesome.
And yeah. And and for my thesis work, I'm making miniature pieces inspired by compulsive hoarding. So that's the piece that was in the Olin Gallery show. Hoarder's Porch was my first. It was like my foundation piece for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how did you hear about the biennial show?
I think one of my professors forwarded the email, so I think that's how I found out about it.
That's really cool. So I was going to ask you, why do you focus mainly on miniature things? Like, what is your fascination with that?
That's a great question. Because it's kind of weird, right? They're like tiny in
Mhm.
scale, sort of like these miniature worlds. I actually, when I went to art school originally, I went for illustration, and then later I changed my major to art history. So I'm originally an oil painter. I drew and painted, and that was what I did in art school. And then at the end of my undergrad degree, I got back into miniatures. I had liked miniatures as a kid. My grandma had a dollhouse that I played with. And I made like little like doll
Yeah.
clothes for like my Pikachu doll and stuff like that. But it wasn't anything like, fine miniature or anything like that. So when I got back into it in college, I just bought like a dollhouse kit on a whim. It was getting really popular on Instagram and YouTube. So I started an Instagram account and documented the miniatures that I was making. Because at the time there weren't a lot of modern miniatures. There weren't everything that was out there was like Victorian, very clean and like I wanted to make stuff that was dirty, gritty, realistic, modern. So I kind of like carved that niche out and now it's like so big on Instagram and I love it. I have so many miniature friends that kind of do the same type of work. So that's kind of how I got started and I personally like working in miniature because you can get like really highly detailed scenes. And for me, I felt like I wasn't getting my thoughts across in painting. And I finally found a medium that works for me and what I want to get across. Um, and for me, I think it's like kind of like a control thing, It's like you have these tiny little worlds. It's like playing The Sims or something, you have these tiny worlds that you can control and like basically do whatever you want with. So that's why I'm doing miniature work and also how it relates to compulsive hoarding. Making these scenes of all this stuff, if it doesn't feel so overwhelming unless you're like really looking close into it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the difference between like why I choose miniatures over another media.
What I really wanted to ask you the first time I even saw the house in our show was I was like, I wonder if if she makes every individual item. And my mom even said something to me when she came and saw the shows. She was like, I was really wondering if she does that. So that's the question. Do you make them? Like every individual?
Yeah, so I mean, there are certain pieces where I make every single item, like my COVID bed piece that I made pretty much everything from scratch or 3D printing. I do a lot of 3D modeling, 3D printing, and that was like a recent, like in the past 6 years kind of thing with my work. But I like to incorporate like 3D printing, I like models with scratch made stuff that I make by hand out of wood, paper, whatever I have on hand, basically. But I also use a lot of found materials. So whenever I go to like a miniature show, they usually have tables full of like broken furniture and like, things that people have donated. I usually buy that stuff because it's broken. It's perfect for what I do. But also it kind of saves me some time because it does take a long time. I mean, the hoarder's porch took like 3 years to make. And then when I got into my MFA program, I was like, I have to accelerate this process somehow. Otherwise, I'm going to be in my MFA for like 10 years. So I do use a lot of scratch built things, especially if it's like a piece of furniture. The build itself was a lot of different pieces put together. Some were like parts of kits, I kind of like scratch build it from things that I had in my studio. A lot of the little things like the little cat litter box was 3D printed. Um, but like all the papers I made from scratch. Some things I just had in my collection, like the seat that's like on the side of the hoarder's porch was from like a project that I worked on for Coca-Cola. It was just like a seat that I took out of a van that
Oh,
I'd made for
cool.
them. So yeah, it was just like something that I had in my collection. It was just kind of collecting dust. And I was like, you know what, I'll make this my own, put some duct tape on it, dirty it up a little bit.
Hmm.
So I feel like my stuff is kind of like a collage of different things, but mostly I try to make everything either from scratch, like a 3D model, or if I make it from scratch with like materials that I have on hand.
So the 3D printing allows you to make it that small scale usually if you want something really tiny. Like what comes to mind for me is like the little cans and water bottles that are on the
Mhm.
porch. Like those
Yeah,
are
yeah, those were all 3D printed. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So
Awesome.
I have a few 3D printers, but I specifically resin 3D printing allows me to get like that highly detailed, the little tab on the can kind of detail that it would just take me so long to make if I did that from scratch. And it's possible. I just needed like, 20 of them. If
Yeah.
I was gonna make every single one from scratch, it would take me, 100 years to do that. So there are ways that I kind of cut down on time and I focus on things that are actually more important.
Yeah. So how do you choose these subjects or places that you're creating?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Right now, like my thesis is on my mind because I have a year left, and
Yeah.
that's my show's next spring. So, how I chose those pieces were some things were from my own experiences. So either growing up in a hoarding situation, which I did, um, or things that I've encountered over the years of other people's hoarding situations, or things from history. So I'm doing like a piece about the Collier brothers, who are like the most famous hoarders ever. And so I'm doing a 10 works, hopefully, if I get them done. I'm doing at least 10 miniatures. So each one will have a story. It'll be like one, room in a house or like one scene, basically. I recently did like a hoarder's car called Time's Up Betty. I think I sent you guys pictures of that one. That one I just finished like a month ago. But that's also for my thesis. So it's like I'm trying to tell narratives through these stories, keeping it kind of anonymous because some of
Yeah.
these are people I know or even like my own experiences. So it's like I'm trying to tell these stories as not ambiguously, but like kind of like you can put your own, thoughts on it. Because like at the show specifically, I had a lot of people come up to me and they were either like, "Oh my God, it's so cute and tiny," I always get that. But on the other hand, I had a lot of people saying, "My mom's a hoarder," I relate to this piece. I can see myself in this piece. So that's why I make the work and what I'm hoping to get a reaction out of. But you can never tell what people are gonna get from your work
Yeah.
specifically.
So you grew up in a hoarding household, and that's where you think your inspiration comes from, I'd say.
Mostly, yeah. And I also am pretty involved in the Children of Hoarders subreddit on Reddit. So I read a lot of stories on there. It's a great place for adult children of hoarders to kind of congregate and and tell their stories. So I do get a lot of inspiration from those stories as well. But mostly my own experiences, you know, things that I had to deal with as a kid. And I'm doing a few pieces about that. But then other, you know, other stories, like I'm doing one piece about, um, I had a friend that invited me over to a friend of hers who had passed away, who was a hoarder, very wealthy, and all of the stuff in the apartment was like brand new with tags on it. So it's like I want to show that like that dual, like it doesn't always have to be what you see on the hoarders television show, like poop in a bucket or whatever.
Very
You know, it's not
messy.
always, yeah, it's not always that situation. It's not always you know, so gross or whatever. It's sometimes just about the mental illness and about how people deal with their environment and like the objects within it.
Yeah, that's great. I was also gonna ask, do you choose like your specific materials for each project, or is that something that just comes as you're working?
That's a really good question because it's like with miniatures, there's so many materials.
Yeah.
I'm actually doing a miniature project with my students at Radford this semester, and it's just like narrowing it down to like, you know, a couple things to show them is really hard because I mean, you can make a miniature chair out of so many different types of materials. You could use cardboard, chipboard, paper, wood, you know, plastic, whatever. So it's like it really depends on what it is. Like for the hoarder's porch, I kind of just went into my collection and was I also, you know, it's not based on a specific house or anything. It was kind of just kind of like a just inspired by the things that I've seen even in Virginia, you know, just driving around to different porches and things. But some of the pieces I was like, okay, well, if I 3D print this, how long will it take me to make the model? What if I made this from scratch? So I kind of like make a list in my sketchbook when I'm sketching things out of like each object that I'm thinking of putting in that is really important. Like for the hoarder's porch, I wanted cans, obviously, but I really wanted an ashtray full of cigarettes. And I was like, how am I gonna make the ashtray? Should I make it out of scrap, like clay, maybe? And I ended up 3D printing it because it was the easiest way. But
Yeah.
then I was like, how do I make the cigarettes? And then I was like, kind of like, should I make them out of rolled paper? That would take a long time. And I ended up using very thin styrene rods, which is like a plastic, because you can bend it really easily and paint it. So that's how I made the cigarettes. And then for the ash, I used pastels. So it really depends on what I'm making for sure.
Yeah.
I also utilize a lot of printables. So like all the labels you see in my pieces and newspapers and, you know, flyers and all those things. I print them out on paper and I cut them out individually. Quite
Wow.
time consuming.
Yeah, it seems like it very time consuming. Do you have like a span of time that it takes you to do this usually, or is it kind of just something you come back to here and there?
Yeah, I do have projects where I kind of like they're like in the graveyard over here that I've kind
Yeah.
of abandoned because I just haven't had time. But usually for my thesis stuff, I've been pretty strict with myself because I really want to get the pieces done. So if I have like a deadline, like when I work for a commercial company or something, the deadline is the deadline. I work up to the deadline. But for my personal work, I kind of have to make my own deadlines. And
Yeah.
I've been trying to do like a month or to a month and a half, maybe 2 months max. Like I think the hoarder's car took a couple months just because I was busy, but now that I'm like fully committed to my thesis stuff, I would say 1 to 2 months, depending on the complexity and also if I'm filming it for TikTok, that adds more time filming stuff because I want to document my process.
Yeah, it's definitely a patient process, I'd say for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so where do you create these pieces? Do you have like a workspace or a studio?
Yeah, I have a studio in my apartment in Roanoke.
Cool.
So yeah, I have a 2 bedroom I share with my fiance, and the second bedroom is my studio. It's nice because it has a bathroom, which I've never had in a studio ever. I'm originally from New York City, so I was like, space, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Having a deck where I can like cut things on my saw without, you know, sawdust going all over my studio. So yeah, I definitely have a studio space at home, but then at Radford, I also have a space in the graduate studio. And that's more for just like working during the day when I'm there,
Mhm.
and also for when I meet with my advisor.
So you do most of your own personal work in your apartment.
Yeah, just because all my tools are here and it's like a
A lot
lot to
to
bring back and
travel.
forth. Yeah.
I can very much assume that. Um, are there aspects of the work that are more meaningful to you than like to the viewers because they can't really understand or see?
Yeah, I would say I do put a lot of like Easter eggs, I guess,
Mhm.
in my work that some people definitely don't even, they're like, what? Like the eviction notices and the hoarder's porch. I
Yeah.
feel like those are a little more obvious, but there's some other ones that aren't as obvious. You kind of have to look for them, like in the trash pile, you know. There's children's toys, there's Halloween and Christmas decorations.
Yes.
And I feel like
I've
some,
looked through the pile a few
yeah,
times. I'm interested.
awesome. Yeah, and I feel like sometimes people don't make that connection, like kind of how sad that is,
Mhm.
that all these children toys are kind of just piled up on a porch, but it's very common, with hoarded houses to have, an abundance of objects.
Yes.
And then, just like other things that I've put in other works, like my COVID bed piece, there's like a little stimulus check on the side table, and I don't think a lot of people actually notice or realize. I put like a little COVID test, things that like allude to COVID, and
Yeah.
so I try and do that, like put like tiny little like the devil's in the details, basically.
That's awesome. Um, what is your experience working with like the bigger companies, like you said, like Coke and the other ones you were talking about?
Yeah, it's definitely a different experience doing commission work for,
Yeah.
a corporate company. Um, because, you think that they wouldn't allow you to kind of like be creative, but I feel like it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Um, I've only had great experiences the only bad experience, not bad, but like the only kind of like, I could have done that.
Conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, are just like companies that don't give me enough time. Like, you have to do this in a week. And I'm like, you know how long a miniature takes? Like, they don't get it. So that's the one challenge I feel like with making miniature content for large companies is the timeline usually is very, very short. I will say for my two recent commissions, which was Xbox last summer and General Mills, they gave me plenty of time. They gave me a lot of time. I was like really surprised. Xbox in particular gave gave me like 2 months. I was like, whoa, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes you get lucky.
I
I
feel
will
like
say
maybe,
that.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine. What's your question?
I was just gonna say, Xbox probably understands you a little bit more because they are a digital media company and it does take them tons
Exactly.
of time to do that stuff.
I know, like the game models and stuff. And that was a
Mhm.
great project because it was me and like I think six other miniaturists that they hired. And number one, they sent us an Xbox for free, which was like incredible. Did not expect that. But also they gave us so much time and they gave us like free reign, basically. Like we would come up with a proposal and what we wanted to do. And they gave us all the 3D models. So I just 3D printed everything and it was great. Awesome company to work with. Never had a problem with them. And General Mills just wanted like content. So sometimes they'll want the actual miniature, so I ship it out to wherever, usually Los Angeles. I ship miniatures there. Or it's just for a scene for a TikTok. So it depends on like what the company wants. But um there have been a few cases in the past where um they'll like fly me out to somewhere, like Coca-Cola flew me out to Georgia. I worked on set for their campaign, so I was like basically a set dresser with the miniatures. So sometimes like I'll get cool projects like that where like I'll work on set, and I love working on a set. It's just so much fun.
More interaction with the actual thing going on, and that sounds really awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And I love being behind the scenes. I think it's so much fun.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite work of yours? Like, maybe something that came with like a really great process or experience?
Yeah, I I feel like I like all my pieces,
Yeah, you
but
don't have to answer that. That's kind of a hard question, but if
no,
you
it's okay. I will say I just did a bunch of work for a gallery in Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and it was called like a 30 by 30 show. And basically, for the month of January, we made like a 6 by 6 piece every day. And it was very stressful, but honestly, I was able to experiment with a lot of different materials. So I always love projects like that where I can use something that I've never used before, or I can experiment or have fun with like a new material. So that was probably my favorite recently, and it's like 30 different miniature pieces.
Wow.
So I can't really choose one, but I got to use materials that I usually don't use, like making ice and snow and stuff. I usually don't do work like that, so it was fun to kind of get out of my comfort zone a little bit. So I like projects like that.
Yeah, and the repetition probably got a lot of practice in too, which is probably good.
Yes.
Yes. So why did you decide to come live in Roanoke since you said you were from New York?
Yeah, that's a lot of people always ask me, like, why are
Yeah.
you here? Um, so my dad has lived here for like 25 years, something like that. So I've been coming to Roanoke as a, since I was a kid, like every summer almost. So I knew the area, and during the pandemic, it was really hard to live in New York because it was so uncertain. The height of the pandemic in like 2020. And my fiance and I, it was hard for us to make rent, and it was like a big financial thing and strain. And we didn't know what was going to happen. Like we didn't know, like it was very uncertain time. So we were like, let's just move somewhere where we can lessen our expenses and kind of like get back on our feet, and then figure out what we're going to do from there. I had already been thinking of like, at the time I was working in like a corporate tech job that I hated. Um, so I was like, I need to get back into art. Like I'm doing miniatures on the side right now as a side gig. I want to make this like my main thing. And it was just really hard to get that established in New York when you're paying like 2 grand for rent. So we decided to come to Virginia because I knew my dad, and like we were able to, get an apartment here and everything. So it kind of all worked out, and the lower cost of living has been amazing. And I knew I wanted to go back to school, get my master's, and again, it's really expensive in New York. So it's just been like Radford's been really good, and yeah, that's kind of like the gist of it. There's a lot more reasons,
Yeah, I
but
mean, I'm sure,
basically.
especially New York in general is just outrageously expensive compared to here.
It is. Yeah, and we are looking to go back to New York, but it'll be probably a few years. Just because like my fiance is born and raised in Manhattan, and I'm from New York State, so like we love New York and we have a lot of family and friends there, so
Roanoke is
it's been
so
really
much
hard.
different.
Yes, Roanoke, I like Roanoke.
But
We
it's not
found
New York.
good people here. No, it's not New York, but like we found people here. We found our community. So
That's
yeah,
good.
it's been good to us so far.
So I think that's actually all the questions I have for you today. But I do want to give you the chance to say anything, maybe put your Instagram out there if you want,
Yeah.
or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and TikTok and also Facebook. Mostly TikTok and Instagram though, but Panda Miniatures. And I also have a website, pandaminiatures.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.